Hello, in this video we're going to look at maximum and minimum pricing, and this is a graphic that I got from the BBC News website, and this was looking at the effect on the prices of alcohol if the proposed measure to introduce minimum alcohol pricing in Scotland goes ahead, which would make a unit of alcohol 45p. And this would be, we can see here in the orange, the effect on the price of alcohol. The stronger the alcohol is, the bigger the effect it would have. So we're not covering all of these specification objectives, but we're just looking at the effect of prices, price controls on markets. So we're going to be showing some diagrams, and we're going to be looking at some real life examples of price controls and the effect that they have on the market. We're going to be looking at the pros and cons of those as well. In your year one exams, if you're doing the year one exams, you tend to get a case study that goes with the questions. Well, you do get a case study that goes with the questions. So if you did have to answer a type of question on price controls or look at it as part of one of the options of policies, you would have lots of examples in there, but it's always useful to have your own examples as well. And we've got some historical examples as well in this presentation. So a minimum price or a price floor would be where the government impose a minimum price that suppliers cannot charge below. And you can have it at any level that you want, but for it to have an effect on the market, it has to actually be above the market equilibrium. Now, this is first area that students tend to get a little bit mixed up because they see minimum price and they think minimum means small and they put it below the equilibrium. Don't make that mistake. I know price floor and the word minimum suggests that it should be quite low, but it's actually, to be effective, it has to be above the equilibrium. And what we can see here happening is that the quantity demanded is different to the quantity supplied. And so we have excess supply in that market. Now, we've seen this diagram before because we've actually seen it when we were looking at disequilibrium and equilibrium. And we know that when there's excess supply, there will be downwards pressure on prices and the signals to consumers and producers, different things. And we get the rationing function, the incentive function, and eventually it will get down to, it will move to demand equals supply. We get to an equilibrium, and we've got that kind of allocating function kicking in there as well. But when we have a minimum price, it's government legislation. It's saying suppliers are not allowed to charge below this price, so it keeps the market in this state of disequilibrium. So one of the most common forms of this, which you will probably be aware of, is the minimum wage. And these are the current rates from this year, filming this in 2016. And this is really, really recent. And we've got the living wage as well kicking in here because previously, these are the previous rates, we didn't have a rate for the 25-year-olds and over. So I don't know why the government think that, 18-year-olds or 21-year-olds wouldn't need the living wage, but, there are a lot of, I actually lived on my own when I was 21. I had a house, I had bills to pay, but yeah, it can be very, very hard for young people, especially this group as well are most likely to be unemployed as well, so it's particularly hard. But if you're over 25, which I am now, so that's all good, then you get the living wage there. And this is government legislation that says that employers cannot pay below these rates. Okay, so let's have a look at the pros and cons of minimum prices. So minimum wage, why do we do this? Well, it gives workers a few reasons. It gives workers greater incentive to enter the workforce, and excuse me, got a bit of a cough today. It sets a minimum living standard as well for those employees. I think life is pretty hard actually if you're living on the minimum wage, but it does make sure that maybe employers can't exploit you and charge a really low rate. We do look at labour markets in the second year of this course, and so it gets a little bit more complex when we look at it there, and monopsony employers and those types of things. But all you need to understand for kind of minimum prices for this and the minimum wage is that it should raise material living standards if that minimum amount is set above the equilibrium, of course. It can also, if we're looking at not at labour markets, if we're looking at consumption, it could discourage consumption as well, and that's the idea behind the minimum alcohol pricing as well. Researchers believe that it will reduce the negative effects on health that alcohol alcohol can cause. However, problems, it raises costs for firms, and it can make them less competitive. We can have a look at this in a second, but we can see that if firms have to pay a higher amount to their labour, they might be able to employ less. So if we go back to that diagram there, you know, if we introduce a minimum wage which is above the equilibrium level, this amount of people, the quantity supplied, will want to work, but it's this amount that the of labour the businesses will want quantity demanded. So we'll have this big bunch of people here actually unemployed, wanting jobs but unable to find work. And there's also an incentive for a black market to occur, and this is because of excess supply. So people think that this is a little bit weird sometimes when I say actually there's an incentive for a black market, because they say, well, why would suppliers want to charge below that minimum price there? Because surely it's better for them, you know, to supply more, supply a higher price, you know, kind of profit incentive and all of that. And yeah, you know, we see when the price is higher, there's more supply available on the market. But the thing is, there's not very much demand. So demand is there, and then there's all these suppliers that are willing to supply to the market, but they're not actually going to get the demand for it. So actually some of them, if they can operate in the black market, because remember it's going to be illegal to charge below the price, they will lower their price, and there will be people willing to pay at that lower price. So we can get you know, some dodgy people selling alcohol maybe for less than 45p per unit, and it's just black market, undeclared economy. So here is an article from the BBC website looking at minimum pricing in Scotland on alcohol, and there have been all kinds of arguments over this, and the EU are saying that it may breach their law because they feel that it's going to really restrict competition. So we can see there's only a small amount of demand compared to the amount of supply in the market, and the EU were actually suggesting that indirect taxes would work a little bit better, but then the people that are trying to propose this minimum pricing are saying, well, you know, it's obviously effective if you think it's going to kind of restrict competition in the market, and that's kind of what they want to happen in some ways, because they want people to consume less alcohol. Okay, so maximum prices then, where the government imposes a minimum price. Oops, that should be maximum price there. Oops, mistake there. Sunday morning, filming this early. Maximum price. Okay. That suppliers can't charge above. So this is what it looks like. Again, common mistake. Students think maximum. They think price ceiling. They think, oh, it must have to be up here. No. It has to be below the equilibrium to be effective. So you can only charge prices below. Okay, any price from 0 up to that maximum price there. And what we're going to get is we're going to get a difference between the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. So we're going to get excess demand in this market. And because it's government legislation, you're not really allowed to charge, well, you're not allowed to charge above that price. We know, again, this is going to cause a bit of a black market as well. So first example I've got is rent control. Now I love this program, Friends, 90s TV program, very funny, and this is, if you Google actually TV shows, you can get their floor layout, and this is the floor layout of the apartment, and this is one of the pictures of the girl's apartment, and it's lovely, isn't it? And it's meant to be in, it's filmed in California, but it's set in Manhattan in New York, and I think it's in the East Village or something. I've actually, you know, been there and visited it, and it's a very nice area of New York, and it's also really, really expensive, and there is no way on earth that the characters in these shows, with the jobs that they have, would be able to afford an apartment like that big and luxurious and in that area. And they get round this kind of plot hole in the series by saying it's rent control. Now, rent control is a real thing that happened in New York to try and keep rent affordable for people, and it was introduced. There's a long history of this being introduced, but essentially it means that if you've been in an apartment, a rented apartment, since around about 1971 that was under the rent control scheme, the landlord or landlady cannot increase the price of this. Okay, so this is like a maximum price working in the market. And it means that there's all kinds of distortions in the market. So people, because they've got this brilliant deal, they stay in these apartments, even when maybe they've outgrown them, maybe they've had children, maybe their living situation has changed and they really should move. But they're just getting such a good deal to be living in, Manhattan for such a low price. But it also creates a disincentive really for the landladies and the landlords to really do any repairs on the living accommodation. So it can mean that these rent control flats are really kind of poor quality. Now there is government legislation that means that they're meant to maintain a minimum standard, but the best incentive for suppliers to maintain a minimum standard, we know, is through the profit incentive, and then just not going to get that profit incentive with these maximum prices that have been that were introduced as well. So it's actually a very small percentage of people that live in New York that have these kind of rent control conditions, but it's usually what's used in TV shows where the characters have a massive apartment. They say, oh, it's rent control. So pros and cons of maximum prices. So it can make these basic needs more affordable for people especially on lower incomes. But the thing is that, this rent control, because it's been going since 71, the kind of current one that's in place, situations change over that amount of time. And, someone that was poor in 71 might be very well off now. So we're kind of, keeping the price low for somebody that probably could afford it. We're going to get excess demand. And so what we're going to get, I'm going to show you in this diagram here, this amount of people are going to get this product and this amount of people want it. So how do we decide who's going to get it here? It's kind of first come, first served, isn't it? And this, what we call this allocation function, breaks down. And this is what the market is meant to do. We learned about this, for kind of 6 months of the year. We're talking about demand, supply, isn't it wonderful? If it's ever in disequilibrium, it's going to get back to equilibrium. Well, it's not if you've got these maximum prices. And then it's like, well, who's going to get the product? We can't really signal through the market. People that want it more are going to pay more for it. So it's this market allocating function really breaking down. And there's also an incentive for a black market as well, because there are lots of people that want it and that were willing to pay a much higher price, and the suppliers that are willing to supply it as well, but they just need to have a higher price before they are willing to supply it, really. So there will be a black market for kind of resale. So we see this in tickets for maybe football matches or pop concerts or concerts of any kind. It doesn't need to be pop, it could be anything, where there's a certain amount of tickets. They may be priced at £40, but there's lots of people willing to pay more. So we get this kind of ticket tout culture. We get people buying tickets. These people here, they've like queued up at 6 in the morning, and then there's a real incentive for them to sell on their tickets because they know they can get such a high price for them if they sell them on to another consumer who's really willing to buy the product. So that's sometimes where we get these problems in the market. This is an example of the California energy crisis, which happened in the early 2000s, and there were various reasons for this. It's a very interesting thing to read about if you just type into Google California energy crisis. But one of the problems with this was that prices were capped, so that's a maximum price for consumers, that is, and this caused lots of blackouts and power outages and shortages. This is a sign of somebody closing their business, and this, it meant lots of businesses actually had to close for when there were these blackouts and outages. And then this was something from the last election, actually. Ed Miliband and the Labour Party were talking about freezing energy bills until 2017, and this is one of their posters, I assume. But lots of people, when this came out, they said, look at the California energy crisis, look at what happened then, and this is kind of bad economics, they were saying. So that is price controls, and you've got a few pros and cons there as well. They're not the best policies because basically they're distorting the market, they're causing disequilibriums, but we do see them in markets sometimes.